Today on Outside the Box Reviews, we're going to be taking a look at the Bandai SH Monsterarts Gigan 1972 figure. It's been a minute since I reviewed any Monsterarts stuff, and honestly, some of their recent releases haven't been super impressive. Over the years, they've kind of started skimping more and more on what you get with a figure release, and they've been focusing more on Godzilla himself and less on some of the other kaiju, which it's always fun to have some variety and not just all Godzilla. Now, they had previously given us Gigan from his Final Wars appearance, his 2004 appearance, but we finally get the classic Showa-era version of this character, and I was extremely excited to get my hands on him. So excited I ended up pulling my whole kaiju diorama here out of storage and setting everything back up so that I could take some photos and do this video here. No, these buildings aren't necessarily in the correct scale with Gigan, but I think it still looks pretty cool. But let's go ahead and take a closer look at this figure. At a high level, I think I'm really impressed with how they did this figure. In messing with it a little bit after taking it out of the box, there definitely are some issues going on here, so I'll touch on those, but overall I was actually pretty happy with what I saw here. For the head sculpt, he does have his red visor eye. It's done in a translucent red plastic. You could kind of make out there's some kind of detailing behind it to give it some texture. The majority of his skin is this kind of dark green. They have kind of a rough texture going throughout it. He's got the silver horns or spikes coming out of the back of his head, and there's a nice transition between the green of his skin going up into the silver. All the spines and everything on here are still the same hard plastic as everything else, so they do come out nice and sharp looking. He has the big silver side jaws as well. Unfortunately, you could see the left side one on mine is at an angle, so it was like this right out of the package. The articulation isn't such where you could actually readjust this. I think the 2004 one, they were on ball joints. This one isn't. So I'm probably going to have to eventually heat this thing up and kind of try to bend it back into position. I'm a little nervous about doing that. It is relatively thin plastic, and I do worry that it will snap. So thankfully, in most angles, you can kind of avoid seeing it so clearly. But, when you look at them dead on, it is really obvious that there's a problem here. While the mouth doesn't open up super wide, so it's a little hard to see inside of it, they did detail out all of his teeth. He does have the barb on the top of his mouth, and then his tongue is detailed on his lower jaw. As we go down the front of the figure, his green skin transitions into his gold scales. These are a really nice, vibrant gold, and I think it contrasts really well with the other details on the figure. The sections where the green skin kind of intersects and cuts away with the scales, I think look really clean. It works pretty well here. Of course, having the markings going up to his neck does mean that as you articulate his neck, you may break up the look there, but that's just kind of what you have to deal with an articulated figure. The arms are nicely detailed. He has the kind of that cuff that the suit had around the shoulder, that same kind of leathery texture going down the arm, and then it does transition into the big hooked claws here. The claws have a nice sculpt to them as well, retaining that very sharp look, very angular where it needs to be. I definitely appreciate that because this is an area where I feel like it would be easy to make the sculpt a little bit soft. Also on the chest, we have his buzzsaw. It doesn't move or anything, it's just a solid piece of plastic. Another area where they have the thin plastic where I might be a little worried that if you dropped them off a shelf or something, it could break, but it does look really nice here. It appears to be a separate piece of plastic from his main torso, so it actually does have a bit of a recessed look instead of just being flush with the front of the figure. You could spin him around to the front to give you a little better view of that buzzsaw. It does go down really far to the bottom of the figure, and then basically almost all the way up to where the articulation starts for his neck. So they definitely didn't skimp on giving us the saw. I feel like the actual Gigan suit had a little bit more of a potbelly than this, but I think overall it still works pretty well. On his back, he has his 3 sails. These are kind of a duller, almost greenish yellow. The ends of them are all tipped in a white claw with a little bit of pink at the base of it. And at the bottom, they kind of transition into a green that's almost the color of the flesh and the rest of his body, but not quite. I honestly kind of wish the yellow here was a little more vibrant. It seems a bit dull to me, but the sculpt is really nice. You can kind of make out all the individual bones or whatever going through those sails. The webbing in between has a nice leathery texture to it. Spin them around and get a full view of how they sit in there. Now these are articulated, at least the side ones are, but they have a groove going through the body of the figure, so they have a resting place, but you can kind of manipulate articulate them a little bit and move them. Not that these need to be super posable, but if you do move them too much, you are going to see gaps in the back of the figure for it. The legs of the figure continue on that same leathery texture of the rest of the green skin, same color as well. He has the kind of knee pads going on and also that kind of loop around the hip, similar to what he has at the shoulder. The feet, just like the arm claws, kind of transitions from that green into the silver, and they also have a nice sharp sculpt to them. The way they've sculpted these, however, does make it kind of hard to articulate the feet, and so far I've only really been able to get him to stand by leaning him on his tail, and I think it's because he can't actually lean far enough forward over his own feet to kind of pose naturally. The tail itself is pretty nicely done. That gold scale pattern continues onto it. He has the same silver spike ideas going on down there, starting larger at the top of the tail and then getting smaller and smaller as they head towards the point. He has his kind of silvery claw similar to his feet sticking out of the end of the tail, and then more of the dark green skin below. And if we take a look at his underside, you can see the gold scales of his chest go down partway through the bottom of his tail as well. And he does have a little bit of copyright info on the bottom of one of his feet. For articulation, the mandibles on either side of his face move in and out on a simple hinge. I wish they were a ball joint just so I can correct the issue that mine has, but the hinge works well enough if they are lined up properly. The mouth will open and close. Doesn't fully close, like you could push it so it looks fully closed, but it just pops right back open. I think it's because of that barb in the roof of his mouth. But I think it closes well enough. It gives him kind of that sinister, goofy chicken smile that he had in the movie anyway. As I said before, I do wish his mouth would open up just a little further, but really it's not that bad. For the neck, we basically have 3 ball joints going up. There's one at the base of his head, 2 in the mid-neck, and then where it connects to the body. So that gives us a lot of opportunity to kind of get some head rolls going on there. We can rotate side to side with it. Obviously, we're going to misalign the scales there. We get a pretty decent tilt out of his neck as well. It honestly feels like he should articulate a little more for having all those joints in his neck, to be quite honest, but the sculpt is more or less hindering what we can do. This here is about as high up as I can get his neck to bend, so while you can kind of get him into flying poses, you are limited in terms of how straightforward he can look. I think it's mostly due to the spines at the back of his head. You really just can't compress them a whole lot more than this, because these top 2 are the only one with a gap right now, and they're on the same joint. So if Bandai was still giving us more option parts, it would have been kind of cool to have like an alternate neck or something that we could put on. It might actually have to be a whole head and neck system for like a flight mode where he's looking straight in front of him. For the arms, he has a ball joint at the shoulder, so he can rotate forward and back. It's very squeaky on my copy, as well as go out to the side. They don't go very far out to the side at all, and honestly, because of the shape of the shoulder joint, while he can rotate all the way around, you're going to have to kind of pull the arm out to get pretty much anywhere on certain angles. So you are definitely limited in that respect, but I believe the suit actor would have been equally limited in his suit. We do have a really nice double jointed elbow here, and while it doesn't bend even to 90 degrees for being a double joint, it once again does feel pretty true to the character, and kind of in combination with the shoulder, you could get him into more of those classic poses that he has. You also do get a bit of side-to-side rotation at that elbow, but not like crazy amounts. Obviously no wrist articulation because our boy doesn't have wrists. Also because he has the buzzsaw here, we lack any mid-torso articulation. As I kind of showed before, these 2 outer wings or fins are on ball joints, so they can move a little bit up and down and a little bit in and out. I did have problems, I forget which one of the 2, but one of the 2 was popping off for me quite a bit. It almost feels like it attaches more shallowly than the other one on mine. Yep, must have been that one, because that came right off. And it doesn't seem to want to move a whole lot when it's plugged into the figure. It's an easy enough fix to put it back in, but it does seem to pop out anytime I want to move it, pretty much at all. So far, this one's been pretty stable, but that other one just does not want to stay in. We do also get a little bit of play in the center one, but nothing crazy. I can't even tell you if that's true articulation or if that's just how it's attached to the figure. But the middle one's going to kind of stay upright anyway, so I think you're pretty okay not messing with it too much. At the legs, Gigan can rotate a little bit forward and back. It's really stiff on my figure, so I'm really not wanting to mess with it too much. We also get an upper thigh swivel, and then the leg can actually move a fair bit in and out, which is impressive. I wish the shoulder had that much range, but you almost got like a double ball joint in there, so he's actually got good range there, but just rotating forward and back. Oh, that I don't like that. That does not sound happy. Even his other leg's pretty stiff on mine. He has a double joint at the knee. I kind of had to realign that upper joint. At first, I didn't want to move at all, but once it does, you get about 90 degrees out of that. I also get a little bit of rotation here, but mostly it's coming from the hip. Even as I'm moving, I just have to hold the hip still to see what the knee itself will actually do. And then the feet are on ball joints, so they'll pivot a little bit up, a fair bit down, rotate side to side, and they will pivot. I really wish they would... Actually, now that I'm messing with it more... Okay, I think I just had to kind of tuck part of the foot underneath. What I was complaining about earlier, how he didn't stand too well over his own feet. That might have been me not wanting to risk articulating him too much, so we'll test that out. Okay, he still definitely needs his tail just because of the nature of the figure, but I feel like he's standing a bit more naturally now, so yeah, I guess I just had to fix that. And speaking of the tail, fully ball jointed. Lots of different joints in there, so you can get a really good range of motion out of that. Pretty much what we're used to for Monsterarts. It'll go up, it'll go down. You can get multi-curves in there. The only part I've had problems with is the very tip here. That last joint does seem to want to pop out on me, but it pops back in pretty easily. It's the same thing we've gotten with a lot of Monsterarts figures, where it's essentially two pieces plug in together and there's like a floating piece in between that helps hide the joint. So it's really just the very last connector bit and the floating bit comes off just because it's floating, but they snap right back in easily enough. For a size comparison, here he is with the Revoltech Gigan on the left and the other Monsterarts version on the right. I honestly do not remember which of the two Monsterarts versions this guy on the right is. I own both. I have them both in the same display case. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between the two, but I honestly have not done enough due diligence to say that with 100% certainty. Obviously, this Monsterarts Gigan dwarfs the Revoltech figure. That's usually the case. He's a little bit shorter than his Millennium Series counterpart. And I think I might have said that the Millennium Series one had ball joints on his jaws on the side. They're actually just swivel joints, but they swivel up and down as opposed to swiveling in and out. I think somewhere in between the colors of the Revoltech and the Monsterarts would be kind of my sweet spot for this. I think Monsterarts is closer to what I want. The Revoltech one is pretty bright green and bright yellow in places, but seeing them next to each other, it does make me wish this new release was maybe a little bit lighter in color. And then while I really can't get him all in frame, here is Gigan next to the Monsterarts Mechagodzilla, another 70s villain, and then the bootleg Showa style King Ghidorah figure. The body on this King Ghidorah, I believe, is just a straight up ripoff of the Heisei official Monsterarts King Ghidorah body, but it just has different heads and way crappier build quality. And then we could bring in the 64 Godzilla here on the left. Obviously a much shorter Godzilla than most Godzillas, so maybe not our best comparison point. But the closest Godzilla timeline-wise we have. I think I saw something about them teasing a 72 Godzilla. I would love any 70s Godzilla in Monsterarts, and I mean, they've been doing a lot of 70s lately, so I'm hoping maybe the gates open. And then, of course, Hedorah there on the right. I didn't review this thing because it arrived broken, and I never ended up getting it replaced, unfortunately, but God, is it a cool figure. Then we'll bring in the Bandai Creations Godzilla there on the left. I forget which version this is. I want to say it was Destroy All Monsters version. So kind of close to this era. Scale-wise, he's probably a little bit big, but honestly not terribly so. It just has a really big head on it. And then the Bandai Japan Anguirus, who I think scales decently with Gigan here as well. And then one last one, I just had to have an odd number of things here, but the Bandai Japan Jet Jaguar. I forget how much difference there was between the suits of Gigan's first and second appearances, but could we get a Megalon figure and a Jet Jaguar figure? It'd be interesting to see. Overall, I really enjoy this figure. I might be biased towards it because I absolutely love Gigan. It's one of my favorite kaiju of all time. It's one of the first Godzilla movies I ever watched, but I think given the restrictions that kind of come with a character like this and the design of the character overall, I think they did a really good job bringing him to life. There's definitely some little nitpicks here. Bandai's quality control and just build quality and what you get for a figure. The price keeps going up, and I feel like you get less and less every time. It's just not what it used to be when I first started collecting this line, but I knew I had to have this guy. Like I said before, I really do hope they do some other 70s kaiju. even dip back into the 60s. I'd love to get a real version of this crappy bootleg King Ghidorah. That'd be great. And it's funny, like as soon as like they get on these kicks of doing a bunch of different Godzilla figures, I'm like, okay, I'm sick and tired of Godzilla. Like, give me other kaiju. And now it's like, okay, you gave me other kaiju. Now give me the Godzillas to go with it. So, honestly, really do hope they'll step back and start doing some of those older Godzillas as well. However, I think the next big thing that's been announced from Monsterarts that I want to get my hands on is that Iris figure from Gamera 3. I think that's going to be out relatively soon. I think people are already getting it from Japan. But yeah, I'm going to give Gigan here a recommendation. It's not the highest of recommendations I could give, but I think overall it's a relatively solid figure. And I think the less you pay for it, I paid like $130 for mine at a local store, and I think the less you pay for it, probably the happier you'll be with it. But overall, he is a pretty solid release. So let me know in the comments below, are you picking up Gigan? What 70s or 60s kaiju do you want to see get released? And until next time, this has been our Outside the Box Reviews. Later.